Welcome back to the Rufo and Lomez show. We have an incredible 2026 planned for you. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the early victories for conservatives. We're going to be talking about Tim Walz stepping down in his reelection campaign for Minnesota governor. We're going to be talking about the president's spectacularly successful mission to capture the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. And we're going to be talking about a theme that will be running through all of our shows this year. What does it mean to be an American? How can the right and the Trump administration in particular bring us on a journey to have a coherent sense of national identity? All that and more today on Rufo and Lomez.
Quick note before we start the show today. Chris and I recorded this episode Wednesday morning, January 7th, just hours before the shooting in Minnesota. So we won't cover the implications and fallout of this until next week's episode. And also a reminder, Chris is actually in Minnesota right now where he'll be interviewing Scott Bessent. That's going to be aired Saturday on Blaze. So please subscribe if you're interested in seeing that and enjoy the show.
Lomez, it's been a long holiday break. We had all sorts of celebrations, festivities, and it's great to be back. But before we get into the news, how was your holiday? What were the big events of the season?
I was just sick the whole time. The deep state
a recurring theme on the program.
Yeah, I got like a mutant flu. I still got a cough. I think like my whole family has some like mutant strain of COVID as well. Total nightmare. I am still like. I'm like weaning myself off of this, pharmaceutical, like induced, haze that I've been in for like a month. This has all been since Thanksgiving. So I'm going to stop complaining. Okay. You've got me. You asked me a question that sort of immediately prompted me to start complaining. I'm not going to complain. Things are good. I am very excited for the new year. I think despite everything happening, I am actually quite optimistic with the direction things are headed, and I am trying to be sober about this and like interrogate whether or not I am being naive or being sort of have these rose-tinted glasses on because I want it to be true. But when I really like sit down and assess what's going on and the cost benefits and where things seem to be headed and some of the improvements that have been made and, the direction of the administration in general, while there are certainly things that I think, need to be accelerated and we could be more aggressive over here versus over there, we are oriented in the right direction. So I'm going to throw it back to you with the general question. How is Chris Rufo? Okay. Sometimes we need to ask our friends, like, how are you, man? But then also, do you share this general optimism? Am I being naive? Are good things happening? Good things are happening, right? I'm not crazy.
Yeah, good things are happening, and appreciate you asking. Yeah, the Rufo clan is doing great. We had an amazing holiday. We hosted some parties at our house. I'm now doing what's called Exodus 90. And if you don't know what this is, it's a really great 90-day extended Lent season for Catholics. I got a group of guys. We're doing fasting. We're doing kind of asceticism. We're doing readings of scripture.
Wow.
It's been great. And we're working through Exodus, Deuteronomy, and the book of and the Gospel of Matthew over the next 90 days. So
any insights you can share with us?
Yeah, Exodus is amazing, right? So the book of Exodus, the key story is, the kind of spiritual resistance against earthly tyranny. And it was a big inspiration for the American founding fathers, in particular Samuel Adams, who presented the Americans, much like Moses, as the new Israelites that wanted to overthrow the crown, which was symbolic of Egypt. And so I'm reading it with that in mind, and it's just an amazing inspiration because as we do politics and as we fight against the kind of assorted powers of what we're calling the regime or the left or the kind of incipient tyranny or tyrannical structure in the United States. Not to overplay it, but symbolically, metaphorically, it provides a touchstone. It provides inspiration, and so I think it's going to be maybe a sub theme of the podcast as I weave it in. But
I think so.
But the main point, though, and you asked, well, is it just my desire, or are good things happening? Will good things happen? The desire is key. And actually feeling that desire, taking that desire seriously, attempting to act on that desire, and also listening to those signals that are out there, even if it seems like naive or unjustified or impossible, that is the beginning. And so I'm certainly feeling that. And that's the through line of today's show. We're going to be talking about the stunning, effective resignation of Tim Walz. We're going to be talking about the stunning capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. And then we'll be talking about, your stunning presentation at the end of the year at AmFest and what that might mean.
We're not going to spend too much time on that. We'll spend a little bit of time on that. But we are going to talk about the state of the right. So this is all going to come full circle, and I'll sort of tease it a little bit here, and I do want to kind of just riff on a couple of things you brought up, which is one, while these biblical stories certainly provide this kind of anchor and touchstone for understanding our present predicaments and helping us orient ourselves toward what is good and what is ultimately sort of in our bones in terms of our national identity and like how we understand ourselves and perceive of our meaning and importance and place in the world. I also want to like temper that, not that you're doing this, but that attitude, I think, has also led to certain kinds of, in particular, like foreign policy mistakes. This understanding of America as a kind of messianic, sort of a messianic, taking on a messianic role in global affairs, and then also having a kind of transcendental purpose that is greater than just sort of human affairs as such. We are taking on some kind of spiritual role in the world, whether it's seeding liberal democracy or some other kind of sort of abstract ideological notion, something like freedom. You hear a lot. And I think like we have to be able to balance these two impulses, this kind of motivation based on a kind of spiritual understanding of ourselves and our founding versus very cold, calculated, material considerations about the world as it is, our sort of grounded material reality. I do think this actually plays an important role in our foreign policy understanding. And the other thing too is, I'm a little bit rambling right now, but this idea of it's good to feel good about how things are going. One thing, if you spend a lot of time online, is there is a sense of despair and this feeling of things going bad. And you almost get the sense that there is a great desire on the part of at least certain elements of the right to lose, to be in a position of subordination, to be in a position of being outcast and disappointed and betrayed. And that through line, that kind of emotional character of the right, I think can actually have real effects on how the right perceives of itself, how we act going forward, and ultimately can have electoral consequences. So it's something worth thinking about and maybe getting into the sort of psychological state of the right and these psychological defaults that seem to possess a lot of people in our sphere, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I think that is important because, look, there's a place for doubt, skepticism, restraint, tempering expectations. But great things happen when you absorb those, you set them aside, and even in Exodus, I mean, Moses over and over has doubts. At one point he says, no, send somebody else. Actually, send some, I'm not a good speaker. I'm not that, they won't trust me. I won't be able to accomplish this thing. But then he gets over that and achieves these victories. And so, look, the big victory, and especially for me personally, over the last 2 months, was this sudden resignation of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Not a resignation. He dropped out of his reelection bid, which is effectively resigning at the end of his term, because of this Somali scandal that we broke journalistically at City Journal, but also we broke it right here on the Rufo and Lomez podcast towards the end of November. Clap, clap, like, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever you got to do. But this is another what I found so fascinating about this from a metapolitical frame is we dropped the story on, I think, November 19th. It drums up attention on social media. It becomes the most viral story for about a week running. Then Fox picks it up. President Trump starts talking about it. Secretary Scott Bessent issues a statement saying, there's evidence of widespread fraud. We're going to launch a Treasury investigation with the sophisticated tools that they have there. And then it kind of dies into the holiday. And then a YouTuber named Nick Shirley takes up the story and spins it to this on the ground, door knocking, kind of salacious, provocative YouTube video that brings it back into the headlines. And the sustained pressure over those months, none of which we could have predicted or orchestrated at the beginning. We just had to have faith that a good story will bounce in unexpected ways. Culminates in the political humiliation of a man who was, remember, very close to being vice president of the United States. And so this is, it's amazing for me to watch because we were there before it launched, saw it take all these twists and turns, get elevated a number of times into this victory. And so, look, I think that we have to learn how to take the win. This is a huge win for the right. This is a direct humiliation of one of the left's top people, and it exposes in a very important way what should be a national outrage. Is saying, hey, wait a minute, this guy was running for vice president of the United States, and the national media wasn't even curious about looking into these multiplying fraud scandals, but actually kept that story suppressed during the campaign. And it had to be, us here on the show, Nick Shirley, who's not really a political figure one way or the other, and then a variety of YouTubers who now have, gone door knocking to Somali daycares around the country. And in one sense, it's frustrating because, this would have been great information to know during the campaign. But in the other sense, it creates a sense of confidence and courage and excitement because we can really make an impact.
Yeah, so, there's so much to take away from this story, and there's like a lot that's already been said, and I do wonder how much there's left to squeeze about the sort of direct or proximate things that are going on. I mean, there's a lot of fraud. It's coming from this Somali community almost exclusively, which is a very important point. And in fact, this morning, before we started recording, the congressional hearing on this got started, and there's this great moment, and people should go check this out if we can't show it here. Congressman Brandon Gill, I believe it was, from Texas, is grilling this guy from Minnesota, this former federal prosecutor who happened to be a guy who was responsible for prosecuting a lot of the January 6th defendants. And he keeps asking him, like, so do you understand the statistics around these Somalis and the level of Medicaid that they're on and their level of various benefits that they're receiving from the government and the percentage of fraud that is they are responsible, which is something like, of the 98 defendants so far who have been charged, 85 have been Somali. And he's just sitting there like refusing to answer the question. He's refusing to acknowledge that these are Somalis or that this is a Somali problem. He keeps referring to them as native Minnesotans like anyone else.
Does large-scale Somali immigration make Minnesota stronger or weaker?
Certainly stronger.
Certainly stronger. Do you know what percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on food stamps?
No.
54%. Do you know what that number is for native Minnesota-headed households?
Well, to be clear, a majority of the
It's 7%. There's a big difference between 54% and 7%, is there not? What percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on Medicaid?
I don't know.
It's 73%. Do you know what that number is for Minnesota native households?
Again, you're using the phrase Minnesota native households, but the majority...
The number is 18%. That's quite an astounding difference.
And it just shows this unwillingness to engage with what's actually going on. So anyway, that's a interesting development here. I don't think, if anybody's sitting there thinking like the left, the institutional left is going to like learn a lesson from this and change their ways and come to see reality for what it is and maybe, reprioritize how they're thinking about mass immigration and refugee resettlements and stuff. Forget it. That's not going to happen. They're going to have to be forced into changing how they do things. They're going to have to be voted out of office. And so that's a really important sort of piece of this. Don't expect them to change on their own. The other meta lesson, which you brought up is, there is the people who are going to affect change are people like you and Nick Shirley. And I also want to point out, that guy in the Nick Shirley video, I don't even remember his name. Probably
David.
Nobody watching
David.
this. Yes, yeah. David, okay? Yeah. How many millions, tens of millions, maybe 100 million people watch that video. He's just like this background character. He's the real hero, okay? Nick Shirley, I love you. You did a great job. But like that guy's the hero, okay? It's just some guy living in Minnesota, looking around going, what is this? What is going on here? I need to like do something. And what is doing something for this ordinary citizen? Well, it starts with just figuring out what's going on. I mean, in this case, they are so brazen and lazy with the fraud. You can just go on these, government websites and like find everything you need to find. It's not like you have to be, have a lot of resources and hire private investigators and do some complicated and, research or whatever. You could just, Google some things and figure it out for yourself. Go take a drive, get a phone and take a video and post it on YouTube. That is actually enough. So, and I think the lesson I'm taking from this is, there are things that you can just do as a citizen that can snowball to the point where a guy like Scott Bessent is going to be flying now to Minnesota, the Secretary of the Treasury.
Quick update while we're talking about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. I'm actually going to Minneapolis right now, and I have an exclusive interview with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. We're going to be talking about the fraud, the flow of funds, and how we can dismantle this left-wing corruption that's happening not only in Minneapolis, but all over the country. Sign up now for the podcast, like and subscribe. It's coming out exclusively for Blaze subscribers tomorrow, Saturday. Don't miss it.
Tom Homan has now deployed the largest number of Homeland Security personnel to go and deport this massive deportation effort in Minnesota as a result of this. Real things can happen by just doing a little bit of work as an ordinary citizen. And there is something sort of beautiful about this and also very hopeful. You're not helpless. You are not helpless. You can do little things to improve your situation, maybe just by a little bit, maybe just locally. It's not guaranteed to blow up into this national story, but that also can happen. And truthfully, Minnesota is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, yes. There are stuff like this going on in states around the country, in major cities around the country. And I guarantee you, if you live in a blue city, in a blue state, if you live in a sanctuary city, you're going to find this kind of corruption. Maybe not precisely at this scale, but you're going to find similar things. And over time, we can start to root this stuff out and put a real dent in this kind of patronage. And again, that's what this is. This is a patronage network. It's fraud or the ability to commit fraud without close watch and with the kind of implicit impunity in exchange for votes. Okay, that's really what this is. Democrats know they are guaranteed these votes from the people committing this fraud. And it's not as simple as one-to-one. And if you expect a lot of people to go to jail, like, look, some people should go to jail, but a lot of this is implicit, okay? A lot of this, there isn't going to be like the paper trail where you can show that Tim Walz knew and encouraged this was going on. That might happen, actually. And like in Keith Ellison's case and in Tim Walz's case, that might happen. That shouldn't be the expectation, though. Okay, I'm going to close this out.
And it's not required to win either.
Right,
right. And look, to combine a couple points that you made, this is a kind of a 99-1 issue. Committing fraud against the government and stealing billions of dollars amongst voters is, surprise, surprise, not actually very popular. And yet the Democrats feel the need to defend it, at least implicitly, by turning it into, yes, the Somalis stole $10 billion from the state of Minnesota, but the Somali daycare owners are receiving racist emails. I saw a number of pieces about that, implying that not only are the alleged racist emails, which might be real, might not be real, not even that they're equivalent to $10 billion of fraud, but that they actually exceed $10 billion in fraud in the level of evil, malevolence, and social, problem. And so this is a perfect issue for the right to mount a principled campaign that also, one thing I've been thinking about over the holiday, it connects all of these various issues and can be a galvanizing storyline on the right because it's about immigration and assimilation or non-assimilation. It's about, fiscal responsibility. So you can bring along those older Reaganite, kind of budget cutters, cost cutters, kind of accountant type, right wingers. And then it is a, shocking, kind of Trump era MAGA red meat story that gets your average Republican voter, middle class voter, in a state of righteous outrage because they're saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm, working hard, I'm paying my taxes, I'm sending my kids to daycare at great expense, I'm trying to get my older kids through college, and I'm doing all this, but you can apparently just steal from the government with impunity. You can take my taxpayer dollars, and we're supposed to just excuse this because it's from, Somalis or another group. And so it can be a very powerful story that can be told all over the country. And while in some states it will be at a smaller scale, in other states, it's going to be at a bigger scale. So if you look at New York, you look at California, you look at Illinois, if the Somali fraud is in the single-digit billions, let's say, some are estimating 9 to 10 billion. In a state like California, I think we're talking about over time, a much larger figure.
Chris, we're back from the holiday season. I got to tell you, I have been drinking a lot of Kindred Harvest tea, as you can imagine. It's been actually a mild winter so far, but nonetheless, sitting around on the couch in front of the fire with the Christmas tree, watching Christmas movies, drinking this tea has been a warm salve on an otherwise illness-infected season. And the beauty of Kindred Harvest, as you know, is that it's made from all American materials. The Chinese have flooded the market with teas, and Kindred Harvest sources all of their tea from American sources. There are no microplastics at all. They're little sachets they come in. There's no metals. It's all good for you. No glue, no ink. This is the best tea on the market. I highly recommend it. How about yourself? You've been enjoying some Kindred Harvest?
Yeah, I have. I'm a hardcore coffee drinker, and I've been trying to transition from my morning coffee to afternoon teas. And Kindred Harvest has made that process enjoyable, great product, great company, great people that run it. And so whether you're drinking tea at home or you want to make a nice gift, I think Kindred Harvest is the way to go. And right now you can get 20% off with the discount code RUFO at kindredharvest.co. That's kindredharvest.co, discount code RUFO. Make it part of this winter season. You won't regret it. And, I was talking with some guys yesterday, very, very, very successful, very wealthy individuals. And I said, hey, guys, $10 billion is a lot of money, right? And they started laughing because, you think about someone like J.K. Rowling, the most successful author, I believe, of all time as a financial metric, has like $1 billion.
Right.
So we're talking about something that is, indeed significant.
It's really incredible. And, there's also this angle of the massive Democratic corruption. And like you said, it's MAGA red meat. It's good electorally. Okay. This is really good messaging for the right. And during this midterm season, politicians ought to be paying very close attention to this and just hammering this over and over and over again. There is a real problem, systemic problem within Democrat politics with massive levels of corruption. And maybe the charitable read is it's not so much explicit corruption as massive levels of bureaucratic negligence, but the consequences of which are the exact same. And they both produce this kind of degradation of the public space and are worthy of getting anybody who's in office out of office. So I hope that people just keep hitting on this, find it wherever it is, keep pressing on this. I guess my question to you is, though, we've talked about some of these bigger meta lessons. As someone who is very closely involved in activism, I would ask, from your sort of strategic perspective, obviously we're going to let what's playing out in Minnesota play out. It's all very good, and we just want to keep pushing this and keep attention on it. But where else are you looking to apply pressure, or what threads are you now following to go see where we can blow this up even more and make it even a bigger, not just a Minnesota issue, but a national issue, and increase the scale and salience of this thing?
Yeah, well, been on the phones this week asking and answering precisely that question. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of support to take this campaign and expand it outward. I think there are some geographic places, California, Illinois, New York, that are important to pursue because, one, these are centers of power, especially California and New York City. They're the center of kind of pure distilled blue state governance. And so you have Gavin Newsom's California, you have Zoran Mamdani's New York. These are the places where left-wing narratives and left-wing political power, try to ascend into the national discourse. And if you can actually take the campaign to that territory, so you're going into, enemy territory, and you're putting pressure and you're racking up wins and you're doing damage to these political movements, I think that it yields a national benefit. And so now's the time not to, play defense or to shore up the details in red states, but actually to play offense. And something we've been talking about on the show the last few weeks that I think is also important is the left has basically, kind of given up on the BLM era narratives. They realize that those have been exhausted. Those are unpopular. They're electoral losers. And you see this shift in California where they're trying to do this, kind of billionaire tax, basically seizing 5% of assets from the wealthiest citizens, to the same kind of effort in New York City with Zoran Mamdani. They're trying to pivot to an economic frame, and conservatives have to get ready to just talking about BLM, trans, Antifa, which we should talk about, is not a direct counter. But if we have this fraud storyline, if Zoran Mamdani says, "Oh, we need to raise taxes on everyone making more than $150,000 to pay for universal child care," But you can say, hey, wait a minute, you're raising taxes, but you've actually lost, X amount of dollars through rampant fraud and theft.
Right.
You can start to contest those narratives right as they're being born. And so I think there's a huge strategic payout to this. And again, this is a 99-1 issue, and to the extent that you can force your enemy to defend something unpopular, you're going to see a long-term victory. So let's move on to something that I'm very curious to get your take on. This kind of Maduro capture. Give us the story for those who might not have been paying attention during the holiday, and give us your basic take.
It's funny, Chris. We hit on this actually 3 weeks ago, a month ago maybe. This was one of the items we covered, and the boat strikes that were happening off of the coast of Venezuela. And as was obvious then, I'm not giving ourselves too much credit, but what we intuited was there's something else going on here. This is a ramp up to some kind of more aggressive action, or was at the very least a shot across the bow to signal to Maduro that we were willing to take some kind of military action should he not get in line with whatever sort of foreign policy objectives we were trying to pursue and trying to persuade him to pursue on our behalf. Obviously, those negotiations sort of fell apart to the extent they were happening at all. I know there was a phone call between Trump and Maduro right before Christmas. That did not seem to go well. And the upshot of this was we went in out of the blue Sunday night, this really almost like Hollywood-like extraction of Maduro that took, I think if I have it remembered correctly, like 80 minutes. We were on the ground in Venezuela, extract the sitting president from bed, his wife, nobody dies, and then we're out of there. And the next thing you know, he's in a courthouse, or in a jail, I should say, in the Southern District of New York City. And then that's it. The whole thing just kind of shuts off. And now we're in sort of the aftermath of that. And we're going to be sort of figuring out, I think, a little bit of what happens next. And I think that's an important piece of this. So what's going on in Venezuela now that Maduro has been extracted from power? Why has he been extracted from his presidency? What are we trying to accomplish there, specifically in Venezuela? And then the second thing I think is important here, and this is the conversation that's begun to sort of fester online, I think is there's a lot of heated debate over this, and I've been involved in this online, and I don't begrudge anyone for holding a different view on this. These are really important questions, but what is a America First or MAGA foreign policy going forward? We have been in this transition out of a post-Cold War foreign policy posture that has been largely defined by neoconservatism, although that's become a kind of empty signifier. I think most people who use that term don't actually know what it means. It sort of doesn't mean anything. What it means really is really aggressive interventionist foreign policy. So that's been the standard. That's been the default, that we have some responsibility as a nation to pursue and install liberal democracies across the world. It's spread out globally. We are not paying close attention to spheres of influence. We are not respecting multipolarity, which means that there are multiple major powers in the world that have sovereignty over their respective geopolitical space. We were in a what we called a unipolar moment. This was famously Charles Krauthammer's essay that he wrote after the Cold War ended, the unipolar moment. And it was, what is the United States' role as this sole hegemon? We screwed that up badly, I think. We squandered that moment. But even had we succeeded, I think, in that moment, we are now in the tail of that. That moment has exhausted itself. China is now very powerful. We can't deny that. That's just the reality. And Russia, it's small, its economy is small, and it's sort of broken in many ways, and it's, entangled in its own things going on. It's still very powerful ultimately on the geopolitical stage, and we have to be mindful of that fact. So the question is, what do we do next? What does U.S. multipolaric power look like? That, and my view is it should both attempt to preserve as much as it can our dominance and leverage globally, okay, across the globe as best we can, while at the same time refocusing our priorities, one, on this more local sphere of influence, and re-domesticate our foreign policy interests. In other words, our foreign policy interests are meant firstly to serve us at home rather than exist in order to make the world better or for humanity's sake per se. Okay, so that's a lot. I know I just threw at you, but I'm thinking about these two things as actually sort of independent questions. What's going on locally and specifically with Venezuela? But then what does this introduce in terms of questions and then new answers about our foreign policy?
Yeah, I think this is a back to the future foreign policy. And so even if you look at it aesthetically, you said it's like a Hollywood movie, and it's in particular like a 1980s Hollywood movie that has a simple good guys, bad guys, and the good guys are, you know, muscled out United States Marines that are rappelling out of a helicopter on top of the presidential palace, shooting the Cuban, the guards that were shot in Venezuela were Cuban soldiers, you know, from the Castro's, you know, communist regime.
Right.
And they get all shot. The Americans are untouched. They black bag the president, the, you know, communist dictator president of a Latin American country, go back on the helicopter, and they're, you know, parading him through New York City jails by the end of the day. And so this is like a Schwarzenegger action movie. You can actually see it playing out in your mind with that 80s, you know, 3-point lighting, the film score, whatever. And then Marco Rubio comes on the television, and he's giving a classic anti-communist speech. And he says, the enemies of America, America's adversaries abroad, the Chinese, the Russian, the Iranians, will not have any influence in the Western Hemisphere. And we reserve the right to police our hemisphere for our interests, for our purposes.
Why does the United States need to take over the Venezuelan oil industry?
Well, we don't need to. First of all, let me go back up. We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States. They are not going to come from outside of our hemisphere, destabilize our region in our own backyard, and us have to pay the price for it. Not under President Trump.
And again, this is the longstanding American foreign policy that we saw in the, you know, before the Reagan era, but really come to a head in the Reagan era, in the Noriega capture and George H.W. Bush at the very end of the Cold War. But the strategic interest is really interesting. And so, okay, well, what does this get us? Trump, to his credit, is very blunt. He says, we are going to take the oil. The Venezuelans violated their contracts with American oil producers, seized American assets. We're now going to make a deal with the country. And the new president will understand, we can grab you out of your bedroom at any time that we please. And we're going to get the oil pumping. We're going to make new deals, and we're going to have it benefit the Venezuelans and benefit the United States. And this is not trivial. I saw a great chart that showed that Venezuela actually has the largest proven oil reserves of any country on earth.
Yeah.
And so the United States will control if we control the Venezuelan oil fields, our own oil fields, you know, other oil fields around the world, we'll control the dominant share by far of all oil reserves globally. That is extremely powerful. Extremely powerful. And so this seems to me to be a strategic play that is calculated in terms of risk and reward in a very sophisticated way. Does it mean that it will not blow up down the line? You can't guarantee that. But is the United States in a dramatically better position today than it was yesterday at a very small kind of economic and political cost? And the answer is a resounding yes. And so, again, we had this mantra last year. It was Trump foreign policy 10 out of 10. To me, this, like, we're going to turn it up to 11 because this was, I think, a Again, not without future risks, but for the time being, a pretty genius, maneuver.
I'm pretty sanguine about this myself, and I have to say that I'm almost surprised at my own approval of this action. I think maybe more so than you might have defaulted to a more modest like foreign policy posture, and where the rule is first do no harm, a real sort of precautionary principle when it comes to foreign policy. And I don't even know that I would have approved a month ago of removing Maduro in this fashion. And again, this is where I'm like, am I just talking myself into this because I want it to be good? Maybe. But also there's something interesting happening here. I take Rubio's statements to be earnest. I don't think from Rubio's point of view, he is saying something. He's talking about, our enemies and improving our position vis-a-vis our enemies. But there's something else like that's a veil for that he's covering for some other intention. I think in his point of view, that's real. I don't know, though, that I necessarily agree with that as the goal, or I think we need to be a little bit more clear in making the sort of material calculus understood for our benefit. Like, of course, it's the case in the abstract. We don't want our enemies to have advantages over us, and we want to do as much to pursue our own interests. But then, okay, how does removing Maduro specifically help that? What are the potential sort of long-term risks posed by this? What are the relevant historical lessons we should be drawing from? And I see a lot of people, for example, talking about Iraq and the Middle East. I think actually that has very little bearing on what's going on here. That's a total distraction.
Correct.
That's a recency bias problem. It's just the thing in their head. And so that's the analogy they go to. I think it's wrong. I think the more relevant example is something like you said, Noriega, but also like removing in the kind of soft coup way Allende from Chile during, I think it was Nixon and Kissinger's moves to, and what came in his place, of course, Pinochet was like this strongman dictator. But then, we had this, if it's roll back the clock, even the more prudent and restrained foreign policy advisors under Reagan had the goal of installing democracy eventually in these places. And they really did believe, even the modest ones, even the prudent ones like Jeanne Kirkpatrick, who a lot of isolationists point to. She wrote this really influential essay called A Normal Country for a Normal Time, which she talks about pulling back our foreign policy posture in the aftermath of World War, or of the Cold War, refocusing our attention on domestic affairs, which I think is all right. But even she made the mistake of thinking, and she says this very explicitly, all we need to do is install democracies and we can solve the Middle East, Arab-Israeli crisis. And that's just not real. No. Democracy isn't this special magic formula that takes places that are dysfunctional and makes them functional. Like, it might work a little bit, it might work in certain places better than others. But I think, I'm being a little bit glib here, okay? This is like partly a joke, but, maybe the Latin man sort of yearns for a Caudillo, okay, in some sense. Like, maybe maybe certain places, certain cultures, certain places with a set of norms and expectations about leadership and the unique history and context of those places beg for different kinds of governing structures than in other places. And what works well here is not guaranteed to work well there. So the question is not, can we find democracy to run Venezuela, or not the democracy as we might imagine it, how the Atlantic Council imagines it, for example, but maybe we need something more like Bukele, that's not Pinochet per se, but somebody who understands the unique features of that place and doesn't try to internationalize its governing structure, which I think is the problem potentially with installing someone like Machado, this woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize and is the expected sort of, for lack of a better term, like neoliberal replacement for Maduro. And so there are real risks here. And the question is like, what kind of governing structure, and I think this is the target that we want to be aiming at, is stability. Okay, the target is stability. And the truth is Venezuela was a failed state. Maduro is bad because he's a communist, but he was removed because he was running a failed state that was giving us problems. 8 million immigrants had left Venezuela over the course of his tenure, 1 million of which ended up at the Mexico border and are now in America. And we don't want that. We don't want these people fleeing and bringing their problems elsewhere. So yes, communist countries are not good. And I would prefer if this place was not a communist country. And perhaps I would even prefer if there weren't these sort of more authoritarian aspects to the governing structures there. But frankly, I don't actually care about that as a first priority. I care about stability, okay? And I care about us being able to engage in a relationship with these places where we can negotiate beneficial terms for our interests, which in the case of Venezuela means access to oil and also access to markets. The people there are starving. They need food. We can supply them with food. Our farmers need a place to sell their product. This all makes sense to me, and we should pursue that goal. So, okay, maybe I'm being glib here, but I think this is where I'm landing. It's a very sort of more pragmatic than ideological approach to this question.
It seems like you're describing two tensions that are actually represented quite neatly between Rubio and Trump. So you have Rubio's 80s style anti-communism, the rhetoric of, democracy and the people of Venezuela and the great cause of freedom, which I think still plays well in the United States. Yeah. But you said, there's something that is misleading or idealistic, or it's perhaps a cover for some alternate agenda. But the alternate agenda is the one that Trump has said explicitly in kind of contrast with previous American presidents. He says, I don't care. In effect, he says, I don't care about democracy. I care about getting Maduro gone and getting the oil, because that's in our interest, and we want to get the oil back, and we want to get those deals, rebuilt, and we want to, drill, and have control over the global supply of petroleum. And so you have that tension, and in some sense, I think I also, in this case, favor Trump's vision. And Trump on the Machado question, the early reporting seems to be that he is not going to elevate the freedom fighter, the dissident, the Nobel Prize winner, the government in exile of Venezuela that goes to Davos and wows all of the global liberals, and then gets installed and then gets wiped out by the gangsters and paramilitaries. Trump is actually saying maybe Maduro's number two is sophisticated enough, smart enough, and scared enough.
Well, that's right.
That she'll take a deal.
Right.
She knows the structure. We're not going to totally reform the country, but we're going to get it in much better shape and have a much greater chance at stability and profit.
Yeah.
And there's a criticism of that. Is that cynical? Is that kind of dirty business? Is that, not proclaiming the great American principles of liberty and equality? And yes, however, as you're suggesting, perhaps it's the more honest rhetoric. And, the question, I wonder does Rubio know this? Is he kind of presenting the idealistic case while pursuing the kind of realist case?
Yeah.
Or do you think he's a true believer? He's certainly thinking about running for president. And in my eyes, he sounds very good. He looks very good. He's been certainly competent as Secretary of State. What's your read on Rubio?
I think he's a true
in light
believer.
of this moment.
Yeah. I do think Rubio's a true believer. I mean, Rubio's a guy who comes from this background. He's very typical of the Cuban exile, who has a kind of almost sort of metaphysical objection to communism is this sort of grave existential evil that is worth eradicating from the earth as a kind of spiritual evil. Okay. And I actually, I
agree.
agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't disagree. But then also I'm like, all right, while that's true, I'm also not a utopianist. Like, I don't believe that the eradication of evil is a realistic approach to governance. Like, we're living in a fallen world. It's messy and we have to make compromises and we're just doing the best we can. And we treat things like that on a personal, level. Like, this is distinct from our political thinking, in my view. And maybe that's a little too neat. Like, there's maybe room for a little bit more of the spiritual fight, but I think that gets us into a lot of trouble potentially. And so I do think Rubio's a true believer. I do think, and this is why I think it's good that these debates are flaring up online, and there's this counter effort to push back against some of the celebratory response to this, which is like, all right, don't get over your skis here. Don't overlearn this lesson, which is what happened at the end of the Cold War. The neocons, and again, I use that term more precisely than people are using it now. They learned that they won. I mean, they won the Cold War. That's an incredible achievement. It's an incredible victory. And they really did have this period in which U.S. military might could do just about anything it wanted to. And they confused that moment for the ability to sort of rewrite political physics, in a sense, to rewrite sort of the social physics of the world, like just these ironclad laws about how humans interact with each other and arrange themselves across the world. And the thing is, you can't rewrite reality. Okay. And I don't want us to learn the lesson from this moment, this really effective extraction, that we can rewrite reality. We can't. We still live in a world where there are political physics at work that we must obey. And I think Rubio, with the State Department people that are in place, and with people in this broader coalition that are have less of an appetite for this kind of posture of anywhere we find a communist, anywhere we find an enemy, we just go in and remove them. And I really do worry that this might escalate into us going, well, if we could do that in Venezuela, and why not in Iran? Why don't we just go remove Kim Jong-un from North Korea, if it's that easy? I don't want us to pursue that. So I want us to maintain a certain level of caution. I also want to point out something, and I'm not asking you this as a gotcha question, Chris, but I'm just genuinely curious. Do you know we also bombed another country last week?
What? Really?
Yeah.
I was checked out for the holiday. Which country did we bomb?
So we dropped bombs in northern Nigeria to take out a massive encampment of Boko Haram there. And
okay.
Right. And one thing I've noticed about this, like, I heard about this because I still listen to NPR, okay? And so, like, I get these little, like, snippets of news that seem to not exist elsewhere in this ecosystem. So on Christmas, actually, and Trump deliberately bombed them on Christmas as a Christmas, he called it the Christmas bombing. Most people, I haven't seen a single person comment on this. And, okay, the thing the reason I'm bringing this up is, much of what we talk about is only because it like flashes in front of our face. And we give out, and I'm not saying that the Maduro thing is not important. It's obviously important. But much of the things we give importance to and imbue with this sort of like profundity and like this is some big new thing that's happening is only the case because we like see it. It's just right in front of us, this thing we have to talk about. And often the case is all of these other things are happening in the background of equal importance, or at least of their own significance, that we never even consider because they don't have consequence. And so I would just urge people listening who also had no idea about this Boko Haram thing and this Christmas bombing, like, just how important is this Maduro thing in the sort of broader picture of what's going on in the world versus in just the thing that happens to be in front of your face right now. And so you feel some compulsion to sort of say or think or feel something about it. That's all.
I think it seems like they're all linked, though. If you look at the Iran nuclear reactor bombings, if you look at the Maduro, extraction, if you look at this, targeted campaign against Boko Haram, he had kind of hinted towards this earlier. I didn't see this bombing news. I think it demonstrates a Trump policy that combines that spiritual cause and confidence and courage with a sense of restraint and a sense of geography and a sense of self-interest or interest. And so it's an interesting foreign policy. And you notice in all three cases, they're also favoring what a friend of mine who's a now retired Army Ranger says, the difference between the big army and the little army. And so it's not mobilizing the huge, 300,000 people, rolling through a country, having a supply line so the guys can get McDonald's and write emails back home. No, it's 100 guys, camoed out that drop in, do the deed, and they're gone. And so, and my friend, as I've talked to him about his own experience overseas in Afghanistan and in parts of Asia, going and doing these night raids where you're, killing the bad guy, taking the bad guy, blowing up the drug facilities, perhaps the foreign policy that we could imagine and we could build is based on those techniques, is to say, recognizing our limits, but also not losing that sense of confidence. And I think this Maduro taking is particularly important because it demonstrates that, yes, we've learned the lesson of nation building, of utopianism, of long-term occupation, but we haven't lost that American strength, that American courage, that American grit, and really the American capability to extend force in a way that no other country could do.
Yeah.
The Russians can't do this. The Chinese can't do this. The Iranians can't do this. And so I think it provides maybe the beginning of a new model. And the spiritual, like we talked about with Exodus, with Moses, is important because there's some intangible that separates failure from success. And if you look at the American foreign policy debacles of this period and these, at least the beginning of a Trump era success, compare it to the Jimmy Carter rescue of the Iran hostages. Compare it to the Joe Biden, kind of shutdown of the embassy in Kabul, and then compare these Trump actions. And it's in theory the same U.S. military. It's the same non-political leaders, but the difference is you have the energy is shifted.
Yep.
And I dare say the spiritual energy has shifted. You have Pete Hegseth. This is now the Department of War. A lot of times you can say, oh, that's trivial. It's branding. It's social media. It's silly. But I think those little intangibles really, really do matter. Okay. And the idea that we're the Department of War gives that sense of that 80s, action hero. Maybe he made some mistakes after the Cold War, but he's back, and he's back, and he's going to win, and he's going to, play Creedence Clearwater as the Black Hawk helicopters are going over the skyline of Caracas, and it's like, you just want to play some heavy metal music and say, our country is back, and the jolt that it gives us as a culture, I think, is something that is non-trivial.
Okay, I have to bring up this thing you just made me think of, which is this is like a very symbolic distinction between our foreign policy now and this other thing you were talking about where the sort of spiritual orientation is different. And maybe even the sort of proximate goals are the same, but the way we approach it are totally polar opposites. There was this HBO documentary that came out in 2017 about Hillary Clinton losing to Donald Trump. And much of it focuses on Ben Rhodes and Samantha Power and the foreign policy establishment who are going to be under Hillary Clinton and what was going on throughout the course of the election. And there's this great moment in this documentary where Samantha Power goes to North Africa, and I believe she's in Nigeria, and they're also there to fight Boko Haram. they show up with this massive UN convoy, and it's this big sort of PR spectacle. And Samantha Power and all of these female leaders from around the globe show up, and they're holding signs that are hashtag bring back our girls. Okay, do you remember this?
Oh, geez.
And they're like holding the bring back our girls sign.
Oh.
And, it's like everybody wants to feel good, and we're going to do something about Boko Haram, and we're going to, rally the international community to come in and like make things right. And then Samantha Power gets up and they fly away. However, what happens there as this little coda to this moment is the convoy on its way out runs over one of these poor villager kids and he dies. Okay. And the documentary like lingers on this like sad sort of unexpected outcome of our involvement over there. This poor dead kid in this village because the convoy of the people holding up the signs runs him over versus a midnight Christmas bombing of these encampments where you're in and out and that's it. The bad guys are dead. And we just then fly off and go somewhere else, okay? And I do think, like, while I have some mixed feelings about what are we actually trying to accomplish in Nigeria and everything else, that does illustrate, I think, this point between the difference in these two approaches. And I absolutely
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me there's a difference between a hashtag and a bomb?
I
Those
am
are
here
not
to
the
tell
same
you that
political methods?
That these are different things. Yes, that is my bold, novel claim here on the
I'm
Rufo
hearing it for
and
the
Lomez
first
show.
time.
Yes,
I'm
this is
hearing
how
it for
we're
the
entering
first time.
2026. Bold, hot takes from the Rufo and Lomez show.
That's
Please go watch.
counterintuitive.
I'm going to have to find a clip from this documentary. It's actually incredible. But okay, let's carry on.
That's counterintuitive. Okay, yeah, I think that that's so interesting because there's a certain feminine, masculine. There's a certain culture and warfare. That's like a perfect point of comparison of the various foreign policies. And so, my favorite little instance or little kind of parable is, they set up a gender studies master's program at Kabul University at one point. It's like, well, okay, well, I guess that's good.
The foreign policy advisor who tweeted about bringing black girl magic to Afghanistan. That's the tweet that'll never be topped. If we can find that. Her name was Karen, by the way. I remember this very distinctly.
Of course
I can't remember her last name. But black girl magic in Afghanistan versus, we're just going to go in the middle of the night, capture the president who we don't like and who's causing problems, remove him, and then we're going to sort out the details on the other side of that. Okay, these are very different approaches.
Very different approaches.
Lastly, I just want to say, I have to say this. Time does matter. The dilation and the duration of these military actions matters a lot. And actually, I will say, like, one of the reasons this Israel-Gaza thing has become an albatross around so many people's necks in the foreign policy establishment around America, Israel, elsewhere, it's because it's taken so long. You put this kind of immiseration and the realities of war in front of people's faces for 2 years, they're going to respond negatively to that, and they're not wrong to, okay?
And the death toll. The death toll, hey, there's a couple dozen Cuban military operators that are now dead in Venezuela. Obviously, as human beings, you feel some sympathy, some feeling. You should take that seriously. Anytime there's death, you should reckon with it. You should understand it. You should ask yourself if it's justified. But that's something that is totally different than Iraq or Gaza or these other sustained campaigns. Right. Okay, so the last story, you gave a great address at AmFest just before the Christmas holiday. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you said, and if we can then use it to explore the idea of what's in store for the future of the right, especially in the year 2026.
Yeah, I'll recapitulate it a little bit. And the idea I was simply trying to express, look, we're in this environment in which there seems to be a lot of infighting, and I think really a kind of jockeying for position, an attempt by a lot of different factions to redefine in favor of their priorities what MAGA is, what Trumpism is. And like a clear example of this, and is like, I see a lot of these libertarians, this guy like Dave Smith goes on, I think Theo Vaughn's show, and he's talking about how, well, like Trump promised to do something about like the debt and the Epstein files and like no new wars. And it's like, I get that that's what you want. Like, you're a libertarian and you're entitled to like care a lot about those particular things. But actually, MAGAism has always been this really complicated, messy amalgam of different interests. And Trump is, in a lot of ways, just a kind of boomer, sort of almost centrist, I have to say, and very pragmatic. And he wants the stock market to go up, and he wants the U.S. to have a powerful presence in the world and peace through strength. And, that's really always what he's embodied. And stylistically, he's managed to capture a lot of this attention from different coalitions, but he's not an ideologue. And people wanting him to suddenly become like an ideologue, and an ideologue in favor of their particular interests. And I have to say, the libertarians may be on one side over here. Like, I see a lot of like sort of never Trump neoconservatives doing the exact same thing. They're suddenly trying to rewrite Trumpism as if it is an expression of their political interests. And it's not. I'm sorry. Trump is not the guy who was standing up in 2016 and came down the escalator and was just talking in the same terms as these conservatives who were part of the conservative establishment beforehand. He's not your guy. Okay. So a lot of these different factions who have kind of lashed themselves on to Trumpism after the fact are now trying to claim him as theirs and claim the movement as theirs. I think they're very wrong to do that, and it's worth pointing that out. Trump, first and foremost, has been about immigration, and that's the thing that actually has been focused on. We're ramping up ICE activities in this new year, 10,000 new agents. Immigration is actually going really well. I know it could go better, but the idea that we've reduced our foreign-born imprint by 2 million people. We have net foreign outflows for the first time since the 60s, okay? And over a half century, we are finally starting to reverse the tide on this. So things may not be going as fast as you like, okay? But please, things are actually going well, and they're in the right direction, certainly. Okay, so now my speech was an attempt to kind of provide some perspective. And the thing I wanted to address was that we have to see ourselves in some sense in like a survival situation. Things got really bad. And I think we were in I likened it to like a shipwreck position. And if you try to solve the problem all at once, if you look out at the vast expanse of the ocean and you're caught in the middle of it, and you're in a life raft or a dinghy or something, the idea of rowing yourself to shore is impossible. It becomes hopeless, actually. And the thing you actually have to concentrate on is like the one small thing you can do right now to improve your situation a little bit.
Consider the spiritual crisis of our nation. Who are we? What do we stand for? Can the America we once know be said to exist? We are without a doubt in a survival situation. And if there's anything I've learned from these survival stories, is that it does little good to indulge in the seemingly hopelessness of it all. Instead, we must resist the temptation to despair. We must not allow ourselves to be lazy or weak. There is a small forward step we can take right now, and we are going to take it. We are going to do one small thing to make our situation better. Every time the boat flips over, and it is going to flip over, we are going to make the choice to swim back to it. We are going to get back in the boat, however long this takes. We are going to insist on staying in the fight. We are going to one day tell our own story of how we made it out.
And it's just like rowing forward. You have oriented yourselves toward where you're going, and you have some trust in that. There's a North Star. And I think we have oriented ourselves towards some kind of domestic North Star that actually all of these factions generally agree on, I think. These questions of immigration and national cohesion, questions of affordability, which I think something that the Trump admin could focus on more in the next
Economic
year
growth.
or so. Economic growth, certainly. Sort of reinvigorating our sort of industrial economy and our sense of confidence in who we are. And rooting out this sort of leftist rot that has infected all of our institutions, and being really aggressive with that, which is, something obviously your work is doing among other people. Cleaning out the State Department, cleaning out the DOJ, like all of that stuff is happening. And so the question is, what are we trying to do right now? And it's like, really right now, we're just trying to row a little bit forward. We're just trying to move in this direction a little bit at a time and not get consumed by the existential crisis that we found ourselves in, and the sort of hopeless, impossible situation that this looks like when you lose track of the small things you can do every day. Okay, so this was my sort of like hopeful plea to the right-wing coalition, to the conservative coalition.
It seems, and this is like a reflection of Charlie Kirk, right? Because it's obviously at AmFest, it's about his organization, it's about the divisions that have really deepened in the wake of his death. And I think that, as we have said before, Charlie was the glue that held it together.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this falling apart, and we need to see it coming back together. And what I've found, in my own work, in my own observation, is that there's no greater glue than victory. And so as you get wins, you set the grumblers aside, you set the haters aside, you set the doubters aside, you set your enemies aside, and you provide something that is inspirational, that people can glom onto, that people can use as a stepping stone towards the greater vision on immigration, on the economy, on foreign policy. And so it seems like the Trump agenda is coalescing into a coherent set of principles. Broadly, change immigration, get economic growth, and affordability, and then have a restrained but powerful foreign policy that advances the national interest. That sounds great. I think it's a majority agenda. And so we have to be focused solely on taking that doubt. And the great thing in the book of Exodus is that constantly Moses is in a state of doubt throughout the text. I mean, over and over and over. Well, and then people aren't listening, and then there's the doubters, and then there's the haters, and then he goes to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh kind of says, "What are you talking about? No, we're actually going to make your life worse." And he's in this state of doubt. And so part of it is natural. We can't eliminate doubt. Actually, when you have a political coalition that has no doubt, you have a really psychotic political coalition.
Yeah.
And so take that doubt, but ultimately say, hey, here's the principle, here's the agenda, and then patiently go through these trials and these different stories, these different initiatives, these different campaigns, and get the victory, because the victory is ultimately what will lead to that sense of purpose, that sense of responsibility, that sense of nationhood, right? That's ultimately what we're talking about is, can we build through these individual political actions? Can we rebuild America's sense of nationhood?
Yeah.
And it involves immigration. It involves the economy. It involves foreign policy. Like, who are we as a people is a great question for us to be asking and hopefully answering this year. The last little bit, and this segue is perfect, is every holiday season over the last couple years,
I know where
Vivek
this is
Ramaswamy, Ohio gubernatorial candidate, fixture of the discourse in recent years. He's had a kind of outburst about American identity that drives a lot of controversy. This year, during the Christmas season, again, he delivered. Kind of a bizarre take. And so, can you summarize what happened for people who might have missed it, and tell us why it matters or why it's important?
I mean, it's like I found it very foolish on like a lot of levels. One, it was trying to be sort of conservative red meat. Like, I'm going to define what an American is, And what an American is someone who sort of accepts this sort of particular ideological and partisan orientation that I think the base really cares about. So you talked about like as if your beliefs in transgenderism is relevant to the definition of what an American is. And it's like, well, sorry, actually, like America is inclusive of like a lot of freaks and weirdos and people who have terrible ideas, including about transgenderism. Okay. Like
so his basic take was, if you believe in colorblind meritocracy, you believe in the U.S. Constitution, you believe in freedom and equality, then you are an American.
I'm sorry. That's not real. That's meaningless. Again, this is just an attempt to like sort of recreate the creedal nation, but according to our like contemporary sort of political obsessions. So it's ahistorical. It's also like wrong in principle. It is not just a matter of belief, man. I'm sorry. Americans and Americanism is a real people with real history that is rooted in a lot of complex identity formulation that goes back a long ways. And you can't just step up onto a podium and then like feed us this really facile BS. I hate it so much. I'm sorry. I really hate it. And I try to ignore it because I don't think it's worth actually paying much attention to. I think actually the only important outcome of this is that Vivek is demonstrating an inability to actually hone in on what this moment is really calling for and actually demands. And unfortunately, as the presumptive Republican nominee for governor of Ohio, I think he's already been selected by the Ohio Republican Party. This is a really bad evolution for what like MAGAism becomes in the next 2 to 4 years as Trump goes away and like the next wave comes in. And so it's a little bit depressing to think that we're gonna, honestly, it's a return to like Paul Ryan era slop. If I'm being honest, like it is indistinguishable from something that Paul Ryan might say. I find it totally unconvincing. I don't like it at all. It doesn't address the core concerns of the moment. I think it's an attempt, I have to say, for Vivek to make himself personally more American than he might otherwise feel. And I get that as a new immigrant, he wants to make space for himself, but actually the opposite impulse, I think, is what is needed now for him to have some kind of humility and modesty about his Americanness and the unique nature of Americanness, and to respect and observe that what it means to be American might be something that he, as a personal matter, and his family can only gradually assimilate into over some number of years and maybe even generations. And by the way, that's fine. Okay. That is fine. And so I bristle. I very much bristle at this attempt to redefine what this means for what seems to be, in Vivek's case, his own personal interests, his own narcissistic interests. Okay. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I don't know.
It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays, because as I understand it, as I've experienced it, as I have observed it, the MAGA movement is a movement of the American people. And that sounds like a tautology, but actually it's really important, because these are flesh and blood people who feel a connection to the country, who feel a sense of betrayal, who feel a sense that they want their interests represented, and they have a real historical kind of roots that they want to see, flourish again. And then Vivek is bringing a kind of Wall Street Journal style, highly abstract, highly ideological, and tendentious ideological Americanism that is reducible to a series of slogans and contestable principles. Like, by his definition of what an American is, George Washington would not be an American. Thomas Jefferson would not be an American. John Adams would not be an American. Yeah. Samuel Adams would not be an American. Anyone in the South would not be an American. Most people who are liberals would not be an American. And it's like, who's left? It's like the staff of the Cato Institute, Vivek, and a couple of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Like, what are we doing here? This cannot sustain a logical defense. And I'm curious whether it will be politically palatable. And the recent polling data between Vivek and the most kind of the favored Democratic candidate suggests that this rhetoric is not working with Ohio voters, and there's been a narrowing where some odds makers are now giving about a 50-50 chance between the Republican and the Democrat, between Vivek and I believe Amy Acton. And this is in a state that Trump won resoundingly. And so there is a disconnect here. And I wonder if people, beyond just the Twitter sphere, Vivek has now dropped out of Twitter. Did you see this? He wrote an op-ed journal saying, I'm not going to be on Twitter. So he's basically saying, the kind of online discourse is not working for me. I'm out. I think, again, that's a huge mistake. MAGA was built on Twitter. It was Trump's Twitter account. And so, again, I've had, friendly interactions with Vivek over the years. I like him, but I do think ideologically, I think he's wrong on this. Yeah. And I think politically, he might be disappointed. I think he's going into this campaign feeling that he is invincible, inevitable, the kind of Brahmin political candidate in both like the actual kind of Indian subcontinental sense, but more importantly, the spiritual sense. Right. He's coming back after, making his billions. He's coming back to, backwards Ohio, and he's going to bring enlightenment to the kind of backward citizens. That's the feeling that he gives. And if I know something about politics, the little that I do know, if the Democrat is able to convey that feeling as the dominant feeling coming from Vivek, Vivek is going to lose. Because that feeling, there is a latent feeling of condescension in it. Yeah. And I think that could be a real political problem.
He's got a lot of skeletons in his closet too. And I've tried to sort of like, I guess like minimize the degree to which he might have been, his companies were maybe fraudulent or sort of suspect on some level. I mean, there's definitely something there, but I think he's very vulnerable in that regard. And while I tend to take the view that, look, even a very bad Republican governor, so long as they're just going to kind of go with the national flow and kind of do what national party dictates for them, it's better than the alternative, which is someone like Acton in this case. But Vivek's really testing this thesis here. I find myself, if not hoping he loses exactly, certainly hoping that there is another Republican candidate who doesn't have these same vulnerabilities and who can just kind of faithfully articulate even a bland MAGA message. Please, Vivek, stop trying to rewrite what this thing is. Just be a good little soldier. Be loyal to the party. Don't try to be the guy in charge. You're doing this all wrong. And so I think maybe, if not a full 180 degree turn is warranted here, like 160 degrees. It's time to sort of change what you're doing here.
Okay, well, we'll leave it with the sage advice. But regardless, it's going to be a great year. We're happy to have you back listening to the podcast. We missed everybody over the holiday. And so we're going to be ripping it twice a week and look forward to it. And, I hope that by the time I see you next, you're recovered from the mutant COVID variant.
I'm sorry I didn't mention this previously, but you're going to Minnesota to interview Scott Bessent.
Yes, I am. And actually, the producers told us to mention this.
We failed.
The show.
We failed so badly on this. Okay, maybe they can cut this. Cut this segment and just put it in a previous segment, okay?
Slot it in,
Chris is going to Minnesota to interview Scott Bessent. and we're going to talk about the Somali fraud, and we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to figure out how we can, cure the nation of bureaucratic corruption and negligence, and get these liberal enablers, these Democrat Party enablers of this massive industrial scale fraud out of the picture for good, punish the people who need to be punished, somehow maybe recoup this money somehow, maybe from some of these NGOs who were enabling this fraud. Maybe we can pull back some of the funds from them. But this is all going to be happening on Friday. You're going to interview Scott Besson, and we're going to have this available to our listeners on the Rufo and Lomez show.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be a special emergency episode of the podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a victory lap, but I'm also going to ask tough questions for Besson.
Good.
Because while I think he has been one of the most effective cabinet secretaries in the administration,
so good.
like, again, amazing. Look, I think that actually requires us to challenge him even more and to push him in the right direction to the extent we can, because he has so much power and he's so capable. I would love to see him take it to the next level. So tune in. It's great to see you, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Chris, take care.